Hello everybody, my name is Dr. Merul Hasnan. I'm a retired psychiatrist. Now, we all know that dealing with the COVID-19 situation has been very tough. Most of us are restricted to our houses. Many of us have no income source on the go, and we have very genuine worries and concerns. So all this has been playing on our minds, and it is not surprising that many people might be feeling stressed or distressed. So I prepared this brief video in which I'll try to explain what is happening in our minds, and what is distress, and how we can try to diminish it, or how can we get to deal with it. Now, this is a brief video. It is not intended to explain psychiatric diagnosis or treatment. It is simply a tool to understand ourselves and how we can help ourselves. Now, it has basically a total of 6 items that I want to get across, and I'll explain each of the items one at a time. So the first main point that we want to remember is that the basic emotion, at the very, very base level, the emotion that we are dealing with is the emotion of fear. Now, in the simplest form, when we think of fear, we think of its simplest form. And it would be something like if we see a poisonous snake and we get that fright feeling, or if someone tries to mug us or rob us and we get scared and we may fight back, or we may simply run. And that's true. That's the simplest form of fear that we humans have, and other mammals have that too. But we are a complex species, and our complexity about emotions, around the emotions, to a great extent stems from the fact that we live in time. We have a past, and we can think about our future. Other mammals, to the extent that science understands them, don't have that capacity. So they mostly live in here and now, so they don't carry a whole lot of bad memories from the past, and they don't have to worry about the future. But we humans do. So what happens that when we mix our past experience, and in this particular case, because we're talking about an epidemic, and many of us have read about the epidemics that happened over the last number of centuries. We also know and we have read about the Great Depression, the economic depression. So all those, that is playing into our minds as well. At the same time, we have good reasons to be afraid. So we are afraid of our health. We are afraid that we may become sick, and that's why most governments across the world have advised people to stay home, and that's why we are staying home. We're practicing other things that our governments and health professionals are telling us. But we have a genuine reason to be afraid. Many of us have been laid off from their jobs, so we don't have an income source coming in, and a lot of people basically live from month to month. They have mortgages, they have bills to pay, so they have to buy food. So it's all real to some extent, and to some extent we are thinking about our future. So even if we have some savings and all that, we are thinking 2, 3 months, 6 months down the road, and we don't know what will happen. Those who have been laid off are afraid that once the job market opens, they may not even be able to get another job. So we have fears. Now these fears, we of course are afraid of about the well-being of our loved ones. So we know that COVID-19 is particularly dangerous for the elderly. So those families who have elderly family members, they are concerned about them. And all these fears, when they combine, when they mix with our thinking, they create the feeling of worry and anxiety. And that's how we feel that fear. Now, we also have internal mechanisms, our psychological mechanisms, to try to suppress that fear. Many of those mechanisms are subconscious and we are not necessarily aware of them. And we may deny a little bit, or we may rationalize, or we may minimize about what the situation is. And to a certain extent, those mechanisms are healthy. They are internal brain mechanisms that help us to cope. But the situation is so much real that those mechanisms, when they are in play, either they are not necessarily healthy. For example, people, when they may be denying, they may be minimizing their risk and just going outside, and that's not healthy. Or they may be rationalizing their unhealthy behavior, and this has been, according to the press, has been seen in the younger age group, that they think that they are immune to this, which is not true. And they may still want to go out and socialize and all that. But we have internal mechanisms to curtail our fear, but it doesn't always help or work in our benefit. And overall, what happens is that the fear, those fears, they manifest as worry and anxiety. So that's first important point to remember. The second important point to remember is that we are dealing with a situation that is not plain stress. In technical terms, stress is healthy. And to give you a common example, say if you have a deadline to do a job or to prepare a report, or if you have exams coming up, or if you are planning a social event, a big social event, the stress will drive you to perform better, and stress is healthy on that account. But when stress becomes persistent, it slowly turns into what we call as distress, and distress is not healthy. Now, in chemical terms, fear is basically relates to high levels of adrenaline, or it is a mechanism where adrenaline gets kicked in. And usually that is a short-term phenomenon. But when stress happens, it also affects our steroid system. So the body starts to pump more steroids into the blood. And subsequently, because of those two changes, the adrenal cortical activation, there are other changes, other neurochemical changes that happen in our brain, and other hormonal and chemical changes that happen in our body. So distress, because of those changes, distress causes a number of symptoms. And when we go through significant amount of stress or chronic stress or distress, we develop those symptoms. I'll just highlight a few. So one of the common symptoms is sleep disturbances. So we may get disrupted sleep, or we may not sleep well. Our sleep may not be refreshing when we wake up, or we might dream during our sleep. Similarly, our appetite becomes dysregulated. So some of us tend to lose appetite, and some of us tend to gain appetite. But in both groups, we tend to get a tendency to eat unhealthy. We tend to get a tendency to eat more carbohydrates and fatty food because the body is craving for high calories and rapid calories. So we crave sugary food, and fried food. Our biological rhythm, like the gut, the bowel regulation, that may get disrupted. So we get flatulence or disrupted bowel schedule. So those are some of the biological symptoms that we might get. We tend to get fatigued or tired, or we lose our energy. So we don't have that drive and motivation because of the decline in our energy. Now, these are all symptoms that are happening because distress is causing certain changes in our chemicals in the brain as well as in the body. When we are going through stress, we not only experience these physical symptoms, biological symptoms, we also start to experience what we call as cognitive and psychological symptoms. So cognition is basically the word that means thinking, and psychological is from psychological. So we, as I mentioned in the previous main point, how fear becomes worry and anxiety. So when that mixes with our hyperactive adrenocortical system and the subsequent chemical changes that are happening in the body, we tend to develop a bunch of cognitive and psychological symptoms. Now, inherently, our brain is a bit skewed towards looking at things a little negatively. Or it skews things so that we think more of safety, and it's not dramatic, so we don't really know that, but we tend to look things at in a more gloomier way, not dramatically, just a tiny bit. That's our inherent tendency. But when we are going through that fear feeling and this distressed feeling, we skew it further. So our thinking and our worries, they tend to become more negative, and we can tend to get more preoccupied with them. We start to think too far into the future. To give you an example, and I hope we all stay healthy, but if someone is thinking that he or she may get COVID-19. So instead of thinking, I'll be fine, there will be a brain tendency to think about the worst outcome from it, and think about how the family is going to get affected because of the worst outcome. So our whole cognition tends to become a little more negative. Now, when we are experiencing all that, the third main important point kicks in, and that is uncertainty. So because of the uncertainty, we start feeling helpless. So to give you an example of, say, your job. So if you have been laid off from your job, things are uncertain for you at this time, because if your employer is in a business that is not necessarily going to open right away after the recommendation to stay home is lifted and the businesses are back in business, you don't know when you'll be able to get back to your job. So that uncertainty makes you lose the hope to some extent. And when that happens, that makes us feel helpless because we don't have control over things. That also makes us feel frustrated, because frustration results when we want to do something, but we are not getting an opportunity or the resources to do it, or something is in the way preventing us to do it. And we want those who have been laid off, they want to go back and work. Right? They know that the situation is uncertain and they have to stay home. So that situation will create a situation of frustration. And then all this can escalate to feelings of depression, which is basically a feeling of sadness and hopelessness, and feeling that things are all gloomy and not seeing too much light at the end of the tunnel. Now, again, here, I want to emphasize one point, that if any of you are getting to the point that you're developing a lot of these symptoms, it is important that you seek professional help. There are resources now to call to use the online resources for medical and psychiatric consultation. So I encourage you that if you're feeling a lot of these symptoms, you do that. Now, the next important point that I want to make pertains to behavior. And behavior, we all know what it means, but we don't necessarily keep an eye on it. And that is where what we wish to do or want to do gets disconnected with what we actually do. So I can't explain to you your behavior, because there are so many various ways that we behave. What I would encourage you to do is that you self-reflect. You think in your mind when I ask these questions, or I pose questions to identify the behavior. So let's start from the morning and progress to the evening. So what time do you wake up? Are you still waking up at a time that you used to wake up when you were going to work, or has that been disrupted? How do you do your breakfast? What did you do during the day? So now, if you had a standard 8 to 5 job, are you waking up at 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock? And then after you wake up, are you sitting in front of the TV the whole day, or are you working from home? Are you playing games, or like whatever you're doing during the day? What is your behavior in terms of your eating? Have you become healthier in your eating, or are you eating more unhealthy since the situation started? Similarly, how are you spending your evenings? And now that we can't socialize in the evenings, and especially that we have to stay home on the weekends as well, so you self-reflect on what is your alternative to all that. If you used to go to a gym, or if you were engaged in some type of sports, now that you are unable to go outside for those activities, are you doing any alternative at home to compensate for them? How is your smoking? If you're a smoker, is it steady? Are you trying to quit in this, now that using it as an opportunity, or has it gone up? Similarly with your drinking. If you were a weekend drinker, are you still drinking on weekends, or are you now drinking every day? This is very important to understand, this whole behavior aspect of it, because behavior is a consequence of the 3 previous elements that I've discussed. So if we want to reverse the things, our best shot is to start from the behavior and move things back, simultaneously working with our thinking and our psychological aspects. So I hope you have made these 4 points clear enough for you to understand. And now I'm going to start. Next 2 points basically pertain to how you can, if you are feeling distressed, how you can make things better. So the basic remedy is to regain control and top it off with faith. So the whole thing that what you need to do is to establish, regain the control. If you again just in your mind go through the previous 4 points about being afraid, escalating the fear, feeling distressed, having a number of biological and vegetative and psychological and cognitive symptoms, and then a behavior that may not be necessarily the most healthy to deal with those symptoms. If we have to sum it up in one sentence, basically it will be you are no longer in control of your mind or body or behavior. So you have to regain the control. And I fully understand it's very easy for me to just stand here and say you need to regain your control. This is a tough process. Even in face-to-face sessions, it takes a long time. It takes a lot of effort. But this video is just to help you understand that what you may be able to do. So in the next few minutes, I'll try to explain how to do it, and maybe you will be able. It will help you, right? So what you want to do is when you wake up, sometime during the day, you want to write all the things that go through your mind over a period of the day, and also write down your daily behavioral schedule or whatever you do during the day. So whatever you write in terms of what goes through your mind, you make a list of it. So it may be, say, 20 items. So think about them. Whatever comes to your mind that you're thinking about it or you're preoccupied with it, just write it down. Do this exercise for 2, 3, 4 days, and you'll come up with a list. Now, sit in a comfortable environment in a focused manner, with little distraction. Try to sort the list out into things that you have no control over but you still think, versus things that you have control over and you worry about. Things that you don't have control over and you still think, you want to develop some type of strategy to identify when you're thinking about those. And so you have to learn to become a little more thought conscious in your own self. And whenever you're thinking about those, now you don't throw this list away. When you make a list of what goes through your mind and you sort it out into 2 levels, those things that you don't have control over and those you have control over, then what you want to aim at is that you want to develop enough self-awareness of your thoughts that when you're thinking about things that you don't have control over, you want to stop it. And you can stop it by simply self-suggestion, or you can set up some type of routine that if you're really preoccupied and pondering over them and just dwelling over them, you might want to associate that with a behavior, with a healthy behavior that can sort of take your mind off that thought. With regards to the thoughts that you have control over, you want to see what sort of control you have and what you can do about them. And if there are healthy ways, productive ways to deal with them, you simply want to do that. So that was about the thinking part. You want to do a similar thing with the behavioral aspect. And you want to make a list of things over 3-4 days and determine what behaviors are not necessarily healthy, what behaviors are basically making your situation of distress and all the symptoms worse. For example, unhealthy eating or not having a good sleep-wake schedule, or not being engaged in some type of physical activity, and you want to then try to include those healthier activities and take out the unhealthy activities. This is, I realize this is not simple and this is not easy, but if you start working on it even one step at a time, over the course of few weeks, it will really help you a lot. So that was the thinking and the behavioral aspect. And then let me talk a bit about faith. Now, when we use the word faith, it sort of implies we are talking about faith in God, and I'll come to that as well. But faith is basically the other word for trust. And what happens that when we go through a situation of distress, especially in situations where we have no control over things that are happening, we start to lose faith. So when we start to lose that faith or trust, it starts from ourselves. So we lose trust in ourselves. If someone has been laid off from work, he or she may be thinking, I won't necessarily find a job. That's loss of self-faith, self-confidence. We tend to lose trust in the system because we have to push our lack of self-control, not self-control, but our lack of control over things onto someone who should be responsible for that. So we may tend to lose trust over the people who are making these policies, or the trust in government, or our trust in the health department. So we want to regain and work on re-establishing that trust. And in these situations where we don't have control over things, for those of us who believe in a supreme power, those of us who believe in God, faith in God comes very handy in these situations, because we can always put our faith in God, and most of the world has some type of faith in God. So if you have faith in God, this is the time really to avail it. So that will help the situation of distress as well. And so through these various mechanisms, we can try to diminish our distress. This concludes my talk, and I hope this will help you. I'm going to post it on YouTube. You may comment on it. You can please share with others if you think it is helpful. And but this is not a medical advice. This was just an advice to help people understand what is distress, what are the symptoms of distress, and give a few ways to overcome it. Thank you so much. May Allah bless.